This is VSiN's College Football Betting Podcast.
Welcome in another edition of the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast alongside Adam Burke. I am Tim Murray. We will be joined via phone from Matt Humans later on in the show. But here we go. We have one game remaining. No offense to the FCS Championship. The National Championship Monday night NRG Stadium, and it will be Michigan as a 4.5 or 4, depending on where you look, point favorite. Total on the rise, 56 and a half, Adam. So a lot to get to, obviously, when it comes to this game. You know, to me, I think the most intriguing thing outside of just the play of Michael Penix and will he continue to look like a god is up front, Washington's O-line versus this D-line for Michigan. For you, what is the most intriguing matchup, a matchup that you believe might determine the outcome on Monday night?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of them. The other one for me would be Washington's receivers against Michigan's defensive backs, because Ohio State had over 15 yards per reception in that game, back on Thanksgiving weekend. So they were able to create some chunk and some explosive plays through the air. Nobody else really has a wide receiver group that matches Ohio State's except for LSU and Washington. And frankly, Washington's may very well be better. So I'm really curious to see how this Michigan secondary is able to handle them, because Jalen Milroe didn't get a whole lot of time to throw. Michigan really did a good job collapsing the pocket. They exposed some weak tackle play from Alabama. Of course, you had all the bad snaps and all that kind of thing. Michigan had a bunch of creative pass rushing, a bunch of stunts up front. They disguised one guy who was coming. If you don't get to Penix and all of a sudden you got a bunch of one-on-ones out there, he may pick you apart. Yep. So that's the big matchup for me, I think, along with the fact that, as you mentioned, Michigan's front against Washington's offensive line, another big one there. Yeah,
and, look, this will be, in my opinion, the best defensive line that Washington has faced all year. Oregon's is very good. Texas's is very good. But I think, conversely, this will be the most challenging passing game that Michigan will have faced all year. Ohio State obviously has Marvin Harrison Jr. and Stover and Emeka Egbuka, but I don't think anyone's going to compare Kyle McCord to what we're going to see from Michael Penix Jr. So one thing that we talk about all the time on this podcast and on my show and wherever you get gambling is the highs and lows, right? Is Washington, more specifically Michael Penix Jr., Adam, going to play as well as he did, like against Texas? And for Michigan, are they going to continue to make the mistakes that they did? Fumbling a punt, missing an extra point, missing a field goal, fumbling another punt, and almost blowing them the game. So that's where I'm kind of curious about the angle to look is how high is Washington after that performance? Can it be duplicated, replicated by this Washington offense? It might be able to, because Penix is that good and these wide receivers, as you alluded to, are that impressive, led by Rome Odunze. And then is Michigan going to make the blunders that they did against Alabama?
See, I think it's really tough to kind of, dig into Michigan specifically, because a lot of people are going to say, look, it was the special teams mishaps that made that a game against Alabama. And I think that, if you watch the game, you can kind of feel that way. At the same time, once again, J.J. McCarthy, only 221 passing yards. Michigan, only 4.1 yards per carry. They just don't do anything explosive on offense. And their best passing play, that ball that Roman Wilson caught, was not only tipped, but it was an overthrow in route. If it wasn't tipped, it was going to get picked off because he was going to overthrow the receiver. So with Michigan, I still have great concerns about this offense. I keep going back to this. Against Ohio State, their best play was a running back pass. Against Penn State, they didn't even throw the ball in the second half. Against Alabama, were they the better team? Absolutely. But Corum didn't find a ton of holes except for that ridiculous jump cut in overtime that he had. And the passing game just, they had some yards after catch a couple times. They were kind of fluky-ish types of plays. So that's what I wonder about Michigan. I know the defense is good. There's no question about that. I still don't feel like this offense is very good. Yet it's been enough for them to get to this point. Will it be enough for them one more time?
Yeah, and one thing that's been pointed out is that Michigan really, we talked about it on the podcast, and wherever you got our content. Look at the start of their season. It was as vanilla as they needed it to be. They never really needed to do anything creative because they were just better than everybody until they played Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State, really Penn State and Ohio State. So, yeah, to your point, I think it's all fair that Offensively, we've wanted more. I thought J.J. McCarthy, despite not really gaudy numbers, I thought he played well. I thought there were a couple throws that his receivers could have helped him out on. Blake Corum, is he going to be explosive? I do think they'll be able to run the ball against Washington. My question, flipping it over to Washington, is the health of Dylan Johnson. I know Ryan Grubb went on a Seattle radio station and said he's going to play. That's the expectation. Okay, fine. Is he going to be healthy? Is he 100%? Because my question, why ultimately I'm leaning Michigan, I'm trying to figure out a way to ultimately bet Michigan here, is I think Jesse Minter in this defense is going to drop a whole lot, try to confuse Michael Penix, which might be an impossibility because he's a sixth-year senior. He's as precise as it comes. But if they have no dual threat capabilities, if Dylan Johnson is not 100%, I do wonder if Washington really struggles to kind of get it going. Because let's remember this, in the second half against Texas, they didn't score. They only scored one touchdown. So they got slowed down a little bit there in that second half. So I do wonder the chess match that we're going to see ultimately from this Michigan defense with a tremendous front, if they can have enough pressure up front, Adam, where they can drop a little bit and really make Washington beat them on the ground.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair question. I think to play devil's advocate here, the point that I would make is Washington did Texas a favor when they tried to run the football.
Oh, yeah.
In that game. I mean, Dylan Johnson, 21 carries for 49 yards, and that was before he wound up getting hurt. So it was one of those things where for Washington, in some respects, could you say you kind of don't want Dylan Johnson to be healthy because it's going to force him to throw the football? The more times the football is in Michael Penix's hands, the better opportunities I think this Washington offense has because Michigan is very stout at the point of attack. Being an Ohio State fan, it irritates me to no end that Ryan Day wants to talk about physicality and toughness and all this. If you're running between the tackles against Michigan, that's exactly what they want you to do because that's the strength of that defense. So I think for Washington, unless they find creative ways to run the ball, throw it to a Dunze or Polk or somebody behind the line of scrimmage as an extension of the running game, I don't think you want to run the football that much, whether Johnson is, limited or not.
So thinking back, not necessarily to the game that they played earlier this year, because once again, Kyle McCord and Michael Penix Jr. probably shouldn't be mentioned in the same sentence. He went 18 of 30, 271, 2 touchdowns. If we think back to last year when Ohio State and Michigan played, and now look, Michigan's defense isn't the same. I'm trying to bring it up as a comparison because that offense led by C.J. Stroud with those wide receivers of, Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison, Julian Fleming. All in all, they had pretty decent success, but they had a couple interceptions in that game. C.J. Stroud ultimately threw 2 picks. So if you try to think back to the performance Michigan had in that game, Donovan Edwards was the differentiator because Blake Corum, I believe that's where he got hurt, right, in that game. Mm-hmm. So the question I have, and to play devil's advocate to I want to be on Michigan side, is are we going to get anything from Donovan Edwards? Like he's the home run hitter, but he hasn't been that home run hitter this year. But how apt of a comparison is it, Ohio State 22 to Washington 2023?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask, especially because, you spend your entire offseason and, when you play a schedule like Michigan does, most of your season preparing for Ohio State.
They've been trying to, for Harbaugh, it was 4 years trying to figure out, we have to beat Ohio State, and now they've done it in 3 successive seasons. And I think there are certainly some similarities from the explosive pass game that we've seen from the Buckeyes year to year and what we're seeing now from Washington.
Right. And look, Ohio State moved the football in the first half of that game 2 years ago with Stroud. They scored on their first 2 possessions. The one was a long field goal drive. They certainly would have liked more than that. But, their first scripted drive, they marched down the field on them. And look, I will say this. One of the things that really stood out to me with the Michigan-Alabama game, Nick Saban got badly outcoached, and that doesn't happen often. And Michigan's coordinators are really the strength of this program here over the last few seasons because they've made some strong hires, both offensive and defensive. I know Josh Gaddis left and didn't really find that much success after he left Michigan. But Jesse Minter, I love the game plan that he had against Milroe. But a lot of that was to keep Milroe contained. Mm-hmm. With Penix, he's mobile enough, but he's a phenomenal deep ball thrower. And that's something that C.J. Stroud also had in his back pocket and something that Kyle McCord did not. So yeah, there are definitely some similarities here, but again, you spend all year preparing for your rival in that situation. You've got 6 days to get ready for Washington, a team that, yeah, you played a few years ago in 2021, but this is a dramatically different Washington team that now has Kalen DeBoer, Michael Penix, and all these weapons.
As we sit here right now, Michigan, a 4.5-point favorite, 4 at circa, total up to 56.5. We'll get to our best bets a little bit later on here in the podcast. Ryan Grubb, OC for Washington, Michigan's D coordinator, Jesse Minter. That is going to be quite the chess match. All right, we keep it rolling here on the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe. But Tim, it's the end of the year. We will be doing off-season podcasts. Do not worry. As soon as the portal closes, which I thought it closed a couple days ago, and then guys keep jumping into the portal. So I don't know what the deal is with the portal, but regardless, we got a national championship to hit on. Adam Burke at Skating Tripods. I am at One Tim Murray. Make sure to check out all the written work. Adam, let the people know what to expect from VSiN.com leading up to Monday.
Yeah, we're going to try to get a best bet from everybody who's on air. So that's something that we'll be looking to do here. We already have our game preview out. That's been up. Some of our other writers are going to hone in a little bit more on their best bets, some props, of course, for the national championship game as well. And also, not that it's college football related. You and I have done college basketball stuff in the past, including a podcast. College basketball season now kind of takes center stage. So we had some features out this past week. We put together a college basketball guide for some of our partners and affiliates, along with DraftKings Network. So we'll be ramping up the college basketball content a little bit here as well once the national championship game is in the books.
All right. So, looking forward to diving back into college basketball, even though it's been a little painful to start, but, got to keep the wheels going there. We will have a podcast up and running at some point, dust off the old college basketball betting podcast. But let's put a bow on this game. We'll have our best bets. You just heard from Matt. Matt is rolling with the dog, plus 4.5. Washington is his best bet. He's looking to take a little money line at some point. We'll give you ours here momentarily. But I do want to jump in. And remember, we're recording this on Thursday, so all the prop markets might not be out there. But I wanted to take a look at the interception market just real quickly. Obviously, people are keying in on Michael Penix passing yards, set at DraftKings at 291.5. Over-under on touchdowns, 1.5 for both, plus money for J.J. McCarthy, and minus 195 to the over for Michael Penix. Michael Penix to throw an interception at DraftKings is minus 240. Under is plus 175. I actually was hoping that it would be flipped there. I thought because of Michael Penix and just how precise he has been, that maybe we would get a depressed market. But boy, over a half interception, minus 240 for Michael Penix. That was really something I was hoping would be more in the pick'em market, and it is obviously not. So not something I'm looking to bet there. But I do think Michael Penix, if Michigan, Adam, takes away the run game just by the pure volume of passing attempts, I think Michael Penix might turn the ball over come Monday night.
Yeah, I certainly think it's a possibility. Again, people are going to look at this and say, well, he only had 9 interceptions during the regular season, but this is a game where he may have to throw 50 times. So, you kind of keep that in mind. He's going to be playing, as you mentioned, probably facing a Michigan defense that's going to drop some guys in coverage. They're going to disguise their coverages really, really well. Jesse Minter was very good at doing that throughout the game against Alabama. So I would anticipate that Michigan will have a good game plan defensively to kind of overcome some of the things that Penix does. And look, like I said, people will look at 9 interceptions over 14 games that they played here so far. And then people will also look at just 10 sacks. And they're going to go, well, how's he going to turn the football over if he's being protected to the degree that he has been? That may not be the case here in this game. When you think about the Pac-12, there are some good defenses. I don't think that anybody is really as physical defensively as Michigan is. So I could definitely see Penix, with an interception or, some kind of turnover here in this game. I think another one that's interesting is J.J. McCarthy's passing yards over under 196.5. So that Michigan wants to run the football. As you mentioned, we both think that they'll run it on Washington. Washington up over 6 yards a carry against Texas. But that's going to open up the play-action passing game for Michigan a little bit. And, Harbaugh is, of course, a quarterback by trade, as we know. He's going to want to put the ball in McCarthy's hands and let him make some throws. So I actually kind of like that over. Even though I think Michigan's going to have a lot of success running the football down Washington's throat, I think McCarthy will find, some plays out there where maybe a linebacker cheats up and he finds Loveland or somebody like that over the middle for a couple of big gains. That'll get him a good chunk of the way towards that 196.5 number.
Yeah, Colston Loveland is sitting at 34.5 receiving yards. He is the second leading receiver for Michigan this year, Roman Wilson being the leading receiver. Didn't really do much against Alabama or Iowa, but you think back to the Ohio State game, he had 5 catches for 88 yards. So I think that point is a good one where if there starts to be some cheating, do they try to get Colston Loveland a little bit more incorporated in the passing game? Some of the other numbers, if you're wondering, for Roma Dunze, 89.5 is his over-under. Obviously, he went over triple digits in the victory in the Sugar Bowl. Roman Wilson, the leading receiver for Michigan, 48.5. Jalen McMillan, 61.5. Jalen Polk, 51.5. And also Jack Westover, 24.5. He could be a guy looking at, somewhere in the the anytime touchdown market, which is always a fun market to take a look at. By the way, Blake Corum minus 350 to score a touchdown in this game, Adam.
His rushing yards 105.5 with a little bit of juice toward the over on that one as well. And again, I do think that Michigan's able to run the football. So look, I think that it's always interesting to look at these things. I also think it's very important to throw a cautionary tale out there. If you like Michigan, not all these guys are going over.
Right.
Blake Corum probably would if you think Michigan wins this game because they're probably having great success running the football in the second half. But if you like Washington, maybe they kind of try to run the football a little bit in the second half if they have a lead, try to salt the game away, stuff like that. So just make sure that you don't overexpose yourself to one particular outcome where your bet on the side is dependent on Michigan playing really well. All your props are dependent on all these guys having great games for Michigan. Don't do that. Make sure that you kind of leverage props both for the national championship game and also for the upcoming Super Bowl. Leverage those props to have a more diversified portfolio to where you still have a lot of options for making money or at least mitigating losses if the game possibly goes away different than what you expect it to.
Yeah, don't just load up on all pro Michigan and negative Washington and vice versa, depending on what side you like. I will say I did find there's a shop in town that lets you play some same game parlays. I am not an SGP guy, and now I'm not talking about the sports gambling podcast. Very pro sports gambling podcast. But if you do want to get a little creative and lower the juice, so to speak, on, let's say, Michigan money line, if you want to pair it with Blake Corum anytime touchdown, get that price down. I would be stunned. Now, I know Blake Corum got hurt against Ohio State last year, but I would be stunned, Adam, if Michigan wins the national championship and Blake Corum doesn't get into the end zone. That would be a pretty stunning revelation, considering he scored a touchdown in every single game this year. 25 touchdowns this year. Didn't score until overtime, but obviously did find the end zone in overtime against Alabama. So let's get to any final thoughts, and then we'll get to our best bets and how we're looking to attack this game. So, for you, you wrote it up on VSiN.com. Over is the way that you're looking. When it comes to the fact that this game is played indoors, does that give a edge to Washington, in your opinion, because they like to play on that fast track? We saw them look mighty fast down there in the Superdome.
Yeah, honestly, to some degree, I think it gives an edge to both teams, but certainly it gives an edge to Washington because you don't have to worry about any kind of weather considerations whatsoever. As a team, it's probably going to have to throw the ball 75+% of the time, assuming that Johnson is, well below 100%, which is kind of the working theory that most of us have. So, yeah, the fact that this game is indoors, you don't have to worry about any wind whatsoever. You don't have to worry about any kind of precipitation, anything like that may make the ball slick. That is something I definitely think does benefit Washington a little bit in this game. One other point I want to mention here, and I know this is, unless you wanted to talk about this, because I know what you're kind of looking to play here. This is a standalone football game, right? The line is going to be very sharp. The side and the total are going to be very sharp. It's going to have the highest betting handle of any game throughout the course of the season.
Highest limits.
If you say you like Washington, right? You want to attack that money line earlier because people are going to come in and bet the Washington money line and wind up depressing that price a little bit. Similarly, if you don't want to lay the 4 or 4.5 with Michigan, you just want to take them to win the game. Wait it out because you're likely to get a better money line price, which is kind of the way the Super Bowl operates as well. But we see the national championship game generally do that.
Yeah, and look, that ultimately is the way that I'm looking. I think Michigan, pound for pound, is the better football team. Does Washington have the better quarterback? Yes. Does Washington have the better wide receivers? Yes. So does that make me nervous? Yes, it does. Washington absolutely can win this game. There were proclamations, not that I was a part of it, but I didn't think they would win the Pac-12 championship. They did. And I thought they would ultimately lose to Texas. They did not. So I have not had a great feel on this Washington team. I was asked on a radio interview earlier this week, is Washington being disrespected? I don't think so, even though, Matt Newman's alluded to maybe there is a little bit of misunderstanding of what this Washington team is capable of. Look, this is a team that went 7-6-1 ATS. It wasn't like they were, the Oklahoma City Thunder, even though they didn't cover on Wednesday night. Washington did have a stretch, though, no doubt, where Michael Penix, as you alluded to, Adam, was hurt. And that's where they almost lost to Arizona State. Looked very sluggish against Stanford. Very fortunate to beat Washington State. And
Oregon State.
I mean, there was a lot of fortune there throughout the year. They have been now a dog in 4 of their last 5 games. That is kind of crazy to think about, considering Washington is on the precipice of winning the national championship. Are there correlations to TCU? I don't think so. TCU really felt like they were, I don't want to say lucky, but boy, that felt like there was a lot of fortune. You had the scramble, Jill, for that game-winning field goal against Baylor. There was a lot of fortunate circumstances that led TCU to get to the national championship before absolutely getting laughed off the field, and then they had some injuries as well. But I think Michigan is ultimately the better team. I think Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator from Michigan, puts together a great game plan, tries to confuse Michael Penix Jr. Do I think Michael Penix Jr., Adam, is going to be almost perfect like he was against Texas? No. And ultimately, I'm going to play Michigan on the money line. It's not going to be a best bet yet because I'm going to take your advice. I agree with that. I think you're going to get this a little bit suppressed. Minus 185 as we record is the best price out there. I've contemplated, I don't really handicap the FCS, but I've contemplated, do I pair them up with a South Dakota State to get that down to like minus 125, somewhere in that ballpark? Do I do the same game parlay? So ultimately, Adam, I'm on Michigan. I think they win this game. I'm going to be on the money line some way or another. So I'm going to be on Michigan here. I don't think I would really ever get to a point where I would be on laying the points unless it got to 3, which I really don't think it'll ever get to 3. Probably won't get to 3.5 where it opened, but that's the way I'm going in. I think Michigan wins this game. I think they're the national champions, and I think Jim Harbaugh is in the NFL next year and shortly after winning this national championship. So I'm on the Wolverines here, even as mostly a dog better, but I will take Michigan to win this game, and I will be on the money line. How are you going to attack this one?
Bigger question. If Michigan does win this game, when does it get vacated? I think that's the bigger question to ask here in this one. Look, I don't really have a strong opinion on the side, in part because it would make me feel very sick and disgusted to say that, I thought Michigan would win this game. Look, I kind of like Washington plus 4.5, especially because, they're going to be throwing the ball throughout the course of this game. And of course, that would bring something like a backdoor cover scenario into play, something like that. I also think that they bring something to the table that Michigan hasn't really seen. But at the same time, Washington hasn't seen this kind of physicality really either. You could say Utah, but kind of a down year for the Utes in some respects. So I don't have a strong opinion on the side for this game. What I do like, though, is the over 56. And I played over 55.5 already that I like. Look, inside, fast track. And again, I think there are questions about Michigan's secondary going up against this Washington group of wide receivers. We saw it with a much lesser quarterback in Kyle McCord, as I mentioned in the first segment of the show, where Ohio State had over 15 yards per reception in that game. I think explosive plays will be there for Washington down the field with their vertical passing game because Michigan's virtually played nobody that has a vertical passing game throughout the course of this season. On the flip side, I think Michigan moves the ball as well. I think they run it very effectively. I think they're able to throw it effectively when they do decide to drop back and pass. Play action. Harbaugh's got a really good feel for when to call that gadget play or something like that. Their coordinators have a great feel for all those types of things. So I think both offenses find success in this game, and I like the over 56 in the national championship.
All right, over 56 for Adam. Washington plus 4.5 for Matt Humans. And I guess for an official play, I'm not going to give out minus 185 on the money line, so I'll get a little cute, and hopefully it doesn't come back to bite me in the behind here. I'll go South Dakota State, Michigan money line parlay. That's minus $5, minus 185, so that's around minus 118 or so, somewhere in that ballpark. So that's the way for an official play here on the podcast I will roll. And hopefully for all of us to be happy, Adam, all we need is a 34-31 Michigan instant classic, and we're all happy. Matt wins, you win, I win. What could go wrong?
How would I be happy if Michigan won the national championship?
That's true. At least your bet would hit.
No offense, but how would I be happy with that? I'll pass on that one.
That's Adam Burke at Skating Tripods. Make sure you read all the work over at VSiN.com all throughout the weekend and on Monday, game day. We'll talk some props. We'll have best bets from all of the hosts here at VSiN. Follow Matt Youmans on Twitter at MattYoumans247, at @1TimMurray for me. Let's have ourselves a fine finish to the 2024 college football season. This has been the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.